I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I was the family embarrassment. While my sister became a doctor and my brother followed in my mother's business footsteps, I was the creative one, the one who never fit into her definition of success. When I dropped out of business school to start my own catering startup, my mother told me I was throwing away my future for kitchen dreams. She said, "No man wants a woman who smells like onions and ambition." That night, I packed my bags and left home. No money, no car, no plan. Just a dream that didn't make sense to anyone except me. 7 years passed. 7 years of working double shifts, sleeping 4 hours a night, getting rejected by investors who said, "Food isn't a business, it's a hobby." And 7 years of silence from my family. Until last week, when my sister called. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Emma, Mom wants you to come to her birthday dinner. She says it's time to put the past behind." The past? The past that she burned with her own words? Still, a small part of me wanted to see her. Not for her forgiveness, but for my closure. The night of the party, I stood outside a high-end restaurant downtown, golden lights. Laughter spilling out from the windows, the kind of place my mom used to say, "People like us dine in." I smiled quietly. Because that night, she was about to dine in a place that didn't belong to people like us. It belonged to me. I walked in quietly. The waiter looked up and smiled. "Good evening, Miss Harper." I nodded, but he didn't announce who I was. I wanted to see how far they'd go before realizing. At the corner table, I saw my mother. Perfect posture, diamonds reflecting the chandelier, pretending to be the queen she always wanted to be. When her eyes met mine, she smiled like she was being polite to a stranger. "Oh, you came." Then, under her breath, "Try not to embarrass yourself tonight." And right there I knew nothing had changed. But something inside me whispered, "She doesn't know yet." She had no idea that the failure daughter she mocked for years now signed the paychecks of everyone in this room, including the man pouring her wine. They say a mother's love is unconditional. Mine came with a receipt and an expiration date. Growing up, I learned early that in our house, love had a price tag. My mom, Linda Harper, believed success was the only proof of worth. My sister, Lily, was the golden child. Perfect grades, Ivy League, engagement to a lawyer before she even graduated. Every dinner, Mom would say, "Lily, you're everything I prayed for." Then she'd glance at me, the quiet one, sketching menu ideas on the back of my notebooks, and Emma. Still lost, I see. I used to bake at night when everyone slept. Cookies, pies, anything that made the house smell like home, even if no one cared to notice. Once I made my mom a birthday cake from scratch. Her favorite, lemon vanilla with buttercream roses. She smiled when she saw it. Then she noticed the tiny crack in the icing. "You can't even get a cake right, Emma. What are you even doing with your life?" That was the first time I realized some wounds don't bleed, they just stay open forever. When I turned 26, I told her I wanted to open a catering business. Her response? Laughter. "Oh honey, that's not a career, that's a hobby for women who marry rich." I wasn't married, and I wasn't rich, just tired of pretending. So I walked out. No money, no car, just a small recipe book and a note from my dad before he died. "Dream quietly, build loudly." Those words became my fire. The first few years were hell. I worked in strangers' kitchens, slept on sofas, and cooked for events that paid me less than the ingredients cost. People mocked me for working with my hands. My mom stopped calling completely. She told relatives I was in between jobs, when the truth was I was building something. Something that didn't need her approval. It started small, one client at a time. A wedding, a birthday, a charity dinner. Then a food critic showed up uninvited, tasted my menu, and wrote, "A woman with fire in her soul serving art on a plate." That article changed everything. Investors came. Calls poured in. And soon, my little catering startup became Harper Dining Group, 5 luxury restaurants across the state. But I never told my family, because silence was the sweetest revenge. So when my sister called last week saying, "Mom wants you at her birthday dinner," I felt that old ache again. The child in me still wanted her approval. But the woman I'd become? She just wanted to watch the queen eat humble pie. When I walked into that restaurant, my mother's smile said welcome, but her eyes said, "You still don't belong here." She had no idea she was standing inside my empire. I arrived 10 minutes early. The restaurant glowed from the outside. Golden lights, laughter spilling through the windows. It was beautiful, elegant, perfect. Exactly how my mother liked to be seen. I stood at the entrance, watching the guests gather around her table. She looked radiant, diamonds around her neck, glass of champagne in her hand, pretending to be the woman who had everything under control. When her eyes met mine, her smile tightened. The kind of smile people give when they're pretending to be happy to see you. "Oh," she said softly, her tone sharp enough to cut. "You came." Before I could answer, she looked around and added, "Everyone. This is Emma. You remember her, my little wanderer." The table chuckled, my sister. Lily stood up and gave me a quick, polite hug. "Glad you could make it," she whispered. But her eyes said, "Don't make a scene." I took a seat at the far end of the table, next to a group of distant cousins who barely remembered my name. They talked about promotions, expensive cars, new homes. No one asked what I'd been doing these past 7 years. Maybe they thought they already knew. Halfway through dinner, my mother raised her glass. "Let's make a toast," she said proudly. "To my wonderful children, my doctor daughter, my lawyer son." She paused and smiled directly at me. "And Emma, who's still figuring things out." Everyone laughed. Even the waiter smirked as he poured more wine. My cheeks burned, but I didn't say a word. Because I didn't come here to argue. I came here to end something. Mom leaned back, clearly enjoying herself. "You know," she said loudly enough for the table to hear, "when Emma dropped out of college, she told me she wanted to start a catering business. Isn't that adorable?" Her friends laughed like it was a joke. Mom continued, "She's always had big dreams, just small follow-through." I looked at her, smiling faintly. The same smile she once called weak. But this time, it wasn't weakness. It was control. I turned to her and said calmly, "You're right, Mom, I always had big dreams." Then I added, "Some of them came true." She rolled her eyes, thinking I was just being defensive. But the truth was, she had no idea how true that line really was. I glanced around the room, at the walls, the artwork, the scent of the food drifting from the kitchen. Everything she admired in that moment belonged to me. And soon, she was going to find out. Mom wanted to show off her success that night. But she didn't realize she was standing inside mine. Asterisk, the night went on, but every word she spoke hit like a slap. She laughed the loudest, talked the most, and reminded everyone again and again how hard work and discipline built her family's reputation. To her, I wasn't part of that reputation. I was the stain she could never scrub out. After dessert, she called the attention of the entire table. "Before we end this lovely evening," she said, raising her glass, "I just want to thank my children for making me proud." She pointed at my sister. "Lily, our brilliant doctor, saving lives every day." Applause. Then she gestured to my brother. "Josh, and my son, our family's pride. The man keeping our business legacy alive." More applause. Then her eyes found me. Her voice turned sharp. "And then there's Emma, my little free spirit." She chuckled. "Still chasing kitchen dreams, right, sweetheart?" The table laughed again. Even the people who didn't know me joined in. Like laughter was a rule, I stayed quiet. Calm, still, like a storm waiting for its cue. Mom wasn't finished. She leaned forward and added, "Maybe one day she opened that food truck she always talked about. Maybe I'll even visit if it's parked near a real restaurant." That one stung. Not because of her words, I'd heard worse, but because she was enjoying it. She was performing. And everyone was her audience. So I smiled back just slightly. "Actually, Mom," I said softly, "you've been to one of my places before. You just didn't know it." Her laughter stopped for a second. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, a young waiter walked up to the table holding a tray of champagne. He leaned down and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like us to prepare the reserved suite for your guests now?" My mother frowned. "Suite? What suite?" The waiter looked confused. "For your daughter, Mrs. Harper. Miss Harper said she'd be joining your table tonight." Everyone froze. My sister looked at me. Mom laughed awkwardly. "There must be some mistake. My daughter doesn't have any suite here?" The waiter blinked. But you're Mrs. Harper, right? The owner's mother? The table fell silent. All the noise, all the laughter gone. Mom's face went pale. The owner's what? She whispered, "Duh." I placed my napkin on the table and looked at her calmly. Please don't blame him, I said softly. It's not his fault. He was just being polite. Her voice cracked. Emma, what is this? I stood up, meeting her eyes for the first time that night. This, I said, is my restaurant. Gasps spread around the table. Forks dropped. Even the waiter looked like he'd seen a ghost. My mother's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her pride, the thing she wore like a crown, slipped right off her face. Her laughter stopped. Her glass trembled. For the first time in her life, my mother didn't have a single word left to say. The moment hung in the air like shattered glass. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. Only my mother's shaking hand clinked her wine glass against the table, trying to pretend everything was still under her control. Then the restaurant manager appeared. He walked quickly toward our table, smiling respectfully when he saw me. Miss Harper, he said with genuine warmth, we didn't expect you this evening. The private lounge is ready if you prefer more privacy. My mother's head snapped toward him. I'm sorry, what did you just call her? She asked. The manager blinked. Miss Harper, the owner. Her face drained of color. The owner? She repeated slowly, as if the word itself refused to leave her throat. I nodded calmly. Yes, Mom, the restaurant you chose for your grand birthday dinner. It's one of mine. Gasps rippled through the table. My sister's jaw fell open. My brother's hand froze mid-air, still holding his drink. No one said a word. I continued, my voice steady. I opened the first one 4 years ago. It wasn't easy, but I guess failure teaches you more than perfection ever will. Mom blinked rapidly, trying to find words. You own this? Her tone wasn't disbelief. It was fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of realizing the daughter she looked down on had built something far beyond her reach. Yes, I said softly. And for others across the state. You've probably driven past them. They all have a little H in the logo. Harper Dining Group. Silence. Only the faint sound of cutlery from another table echoed in the background. Then one of her friends, clearly uncomfortable, tried to lighten the moment. Well, Linda, it looks like success runs in the family after all. But no one laughed. Not this time. Mom looked at me with wide eyes. Her voice trembled. Why didn't you tell us? I smiled faintly. Because, Mom, you never asked. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Every insult, every cruel remark she'd ever thrown at me, I saw it flicker behind her eyes. All the time she said I'd never make it. All the time she laughed while I cried quietly in the next room. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. I used to wish you'd be proud of me someday. But then I realized, I don't need that anymore. For the first time that night, she looked small. Her back wasn't straight. Her smile wasn't practiced. She just sat there, silent and trembling, in the middle of a room that didn't belong to her. I turned to the waiter. Please, make sure my mother's table gets the best champagne. It's on the house. Then I looked back at her and said, Happy birthday, Mom. Her pride cracked that night. But instead of apologizing, she tried to rewrite the story, pretending my success still belonged to her. For a long moment, no one spoke. My mother just sat there, gripping her glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her friends avoided her eyes. My siblings stared at me, trying to process what just happened. Then she laughed. A small, nervous sound that didn't reach her eyes. Well, she said finally, I suppose you have your mother's ambition after all. Her tone was forced, almost brittle. She looked around the table, desperate to pull the spotlight back to herself. I always knew Emma had potential, she continued, smiling too widely. I was just pushing her to find it. It was almost funny. Even now, she couldn't let me have my moment without rewriting the story to make herself the hero. I tilted my head slightly. Is that what you call it, Mom? Pushing? Her smile faltered. I only wanted what's best for you. I set my napkin on the table. No, you wanted control. My voice was calm, but my hands were trembling under the table. You wanted me to be like Lily, to fit into the version of life you thought looked successful enough to brag about. "Don't twist my words, Emma," she snapped, but her voice shook. Her mask was slipping. For the first time, people were seeing the cracks I had lived with my entire life. I looked straight at her. "You called me a failure before I even had the chance to fail. You kicked me when I was down and laughed when I tried to stand again." Her hand trembled as she set her glass down. "Stop, you're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just finally telling the truth." The entire table went still. Even the waiter froze mid-step, pretending not to listen. I leaned forward. "You want to know what's really embarrassing, Mom? Watching your daughter succeed while pretending you had anything to do with it." Her lips quivered, but she said nothing. Her eyes glistened, not from tears of love, but from the sting of pride collapsing in public. She looked down, searching for something to say, then whispered, "You always were dramatic." I stood up slowly, my voice steady. "No, Mom, I'm just done being quiet." The room felt heavy. Every sound, every breath, every look frozen. My sister finally whispered, "Emma?" But I didn't look at her. I was done explaining myself to people who only remembered me when they needed someone to mock. I turned toward my mother one last time. "You could have had a relationship with me. Instead, you chose your reputation." Then I stepped back from the table and said softly, "Enjoy the food. The chef's one of the best I've trained." Her eyes widened as she realized even that small detail belonged to me. She couldn't stand losing control, so instead of apologizing, she tried to pretend nothing had happened. But the silence at that table said everything. I waited for her to say something, anything. A simple, "I'm proud of you." A small, "I was wrong." Even a whisper of regret would have been enough, but she said nothing. She just sat there, eyes glassy, fingers twisting the stem of her wine glass. The woman who never ran out of words suddenly had none left to give. Her silence was louder than all her insults ever were. Finally, she took a breath, forced a smile, and said quietly, "You could have told me, Emma. We could have celebrated together." I almost laughed. Together? We hadn't been together in years. I looked at her, my voice soft but sharp. "Would you have listened, Mom? Or would you have told me how it wasn't good enough like always?" Her eyes flickered, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both already knew. The guests started murmuring, pretending to look at their phones, trying to escape the tension at the table. Lily reached over and touched Mom's hand gently. "Mom, maybe we should just enjoy the evening." But even she sounded tired of pretending. I stood there, watching the woman who once made me feel like nothing now crumble beneath the weight of her own pride. Part of me wanted to feel pity. Part of me wanted to forgive. But mostly, I felt peace stop because for the first time, I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her love to validate who I'd become. She looked up at me one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "You always had to make things dramatic." I smiled faintly. "No, Mom, I just finally learned how to make them honest." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my wrist, her grip weak, trembling. "Emma," she said, her voice cracking. For a split second, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe the apology I'd been waiting my whole life for was finally coming. But all she said was, "You made me look foolish tonight." I slowly pulled my hand free. "No, Mom, you did that all by yourself." Then I walked away from the table quietly, gracefully, just like the failure she used to call me could never do. Behind me, I could still hear her voice, faint and bitter. She regret this. But she was wrong. For once in my life, I didn't regret a thing. As I walked past every waiter, every table, and every guest, they all turned to look. Not at the failure my mother had raised, but at the woman she could never break. Asterisk, I walked away from that table slowly, feeling every stare follow me across the room. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Even the music in the background seemed to fade into silence. Each step I took felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavy from all the years of pain I carried. Lighter because I was finally setting them down. The waiter stood straighter as I passed. "Good night, Miss Harper," one of them said quietly. Another nodded with respect. For a moment, I almost forgot how it felt to be looked at with dignity. It was strange, unfamiliar, but it felt right. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see if I did, my mother frozen at that table, trapped between pride and shame, pretending not to feel small. When I reached the door, the manager stopped me gently. "Miss Harper," he said, "would you like me to have your driver brought around?" I smiled faintly. "No, thank you. I'll walk." Because tonight wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about money. It was about peace, the kind that doesn't come from winning, but from finally letting go. Outside, the night air felt sharp and cold against my skin. The lights of the restaurant glowed behind me, warm, golden, perfect, like the life my mother always wanted to live. But it wasn't hers anymore. It never really was. I stood there for a second, breathing in the quiet. All those years of struggling, crying alone in cheap apartments, working 12-hour shifts while the world mocked me. Every single second had led to this moment, and I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt free. I looked through the glass door one last time. She was still sitting there, shoulders low, staring into her untouched glass of wine. The same woman who once told me I'd never make it without her. The same woman who didn't realize I already had. I whispered to myself, "You were wrong. Mom, I didn't need to be you to become someone." Then I turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement, the sound echoing like a heartbeat that finally learned to beat for itself. I thought I left her behind that night. But sometimes peace doesn't come from walking away. It comes from understanding why they broke you in the first place. Asterisk the next morning. Sunlight spilled through my apartment windows. Warm and quiet. The kind of peace I used to dream about when I was younger. For once, I didn't wake up anxious. No bitterness. No guilt. Just silence. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching people rushing to work on the street below. For years, I wanted that same rush, the need to prove something, to show the world I mattered. But now, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not even to her. I thought about my mother. Her face when she realized the truth. That brief second when her pride cracked, and the woman who spent her whole life controlling others. Lost control. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like closure. I realized something that morning, something I wish I had understood years ago. My mother didn't hate me because I failed. She hated me because I wasn't afraid to be myself. Because I didn't bend to her version of perfection. Because deep down she saw something in me she'd buried long ago. Freedom. She called me weak for following my heart. But maybe it takes strength to keep dreaming when everyone laughs. Maybe it takes courage to build your own world instead of living in someone else's. I took a sip of my coffee, smiling to myself. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her to see my success or understand my journey. That night at the restaurant wasn't about revenge. It was about release. I picked up my phone and opened a message from Lily. She texted late last night. "Emma." I think Mom realized what she did. She didn't say it, but I could see it in her eyes. I typed back, "It's okay. Tell her she doesn't have to say anything." Because forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself from the weight they left behind. I looked at the framed photo on my wall, me and my dad from years ago. He used to say, "You'll shine when no one's watching, Emmy." He was right. I smiled softly. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. And I didn't need anyone's permission to. That night, I didn't raise a glass to revenge. I raised it to peace and to every daughter who was ever told she wasn't enough. Asterisk that evening, I went back to the restaurant after closing hours. The staff had gone home, the lights were dim, and the soft scent of vanilla and wine still lingered in the air. Everything was still peaceful. I walked through the empty dining room, tracing my fingers along the tables where my family had sat just hours ago. The glasses were gone, but the memory remained. Her voice, her laughter, the way it cracked when the truth finally hit her. I stopped by the window, looking out at the city lights. For years, I thought success would feel loud, champagne, applause, validation. But standing there in the quiet, I realized real success feels nothing like that. It feels calm. It feels private. It feels like peace after a lifetime of noise. I poured myself a small drink from the bar, not to celebrate, but to honor something. I raised my glass, whispering to the empty room, "To the woman you called a failure." Then I added softly, "And to the girl who believed you." Because that girl, the one who cried herself to sleep after being called useless. The one who baked cakes just to be noticed. The one who walked out of that house with nothing but her dream, she was still inside me. And she deserved this toast more than anyone. I walked upstairs to my small office, the one overlooking the restaurant floor. On my desk sat a single photo of my father, smiling proudly, his arm around me when I was 16. He used to tell me, "You don't have to be loud to be strong, Emmy. Quiet strength lasts longer." I smiled through tears. "Guess you were right again, Dad." I sat down, took out my old leather notebook, the same one I used to scribble recipes and ideas in when everyone laughed at me, and wrote one last note at the bottom of the final page. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to remember who I was before they told me who to be. I closed the book, placed it beside the photo, and turned off the light as I walked out. I glanced once more at the glowing sign outside the window, Harper Dining Group, my name, my story, my piece. I smiled faintly and whispered, "Happy birthday. Mom, hope one day you learn what real success looks like." Then I locked the door behind me and stepped into the quiet night. The world didn't clap. No music played. But inside me, there was silence, the kind that finally means you've won.